Before we officially begin, I would like to thank a few people. First, Soumya Kaura, former president of YPE, who's sitting in our audience today. She was absolutely fundamental in getting our panelists together, and I can 100% guarantee that without her, this would not have happened. Second, Tiana Idoni Matthews of Uncharted Play, who was extremely helpful in fine-tuning our topics of conversation. And lastly, but certainly not least, Aubrey Bashai and Vinson Elkins for this amazing spread. Aubrey, you were a complete delight to work with, and thank you for making sure everything logistical went off without a hitch. And on to our panelists. Jessica O. Matthews is the founder and CEO of Uncharted Play, an energy company that designs renewable energy technology systems for infrastructure and smart applications. Jessica's research and career centers around the intersection of disruptive technology, human behavior, and the psychology of self-actualization. Jessica has a degree in psychology and economics from Harvard University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Her list of accolades include Fortune's Most Promising Women Entrepreneurs, Forbes 30 Under 30 list, Inc. Magazine 30 Under 30, and Harvard University Scientist of the Year. Senior Associate in the Venture Capital Division of Vinson Elkins, Eliot Cotton represents founders, high-growth companies, and venture capital firms. His experience spans a variety of industries, including oil and gas, real estate, entertainment, and healthcare. Eliot earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Texas at Austin and his JD from the University of Texas School of Law. Jessica and Eliot, thank you for joining us this evening. Aubrey, Tiana, and Soumya, thank you so much for all your work. If you could please give them a quick round of applause. My name is Shruti Nayar. I'm Senior Analyst at Green Street Solar Power, and I'm also a board member for YPE. Just to give you guys a brief introduction of me, I'll be moderating your panel this evening. Barely a buzzword a decade ago, climate change has become a topic of conversation and education in elementary schools, universities, risk assessment companies, and laboratories around the world. Projections spanning a host of industries are pointing towards renewables increasing their presence. Bloomberg New Energy Finance's latest issue of their New Energy Outlook concludes that renewable energy cost declines continue to outpace what analysts predicted only 1 year ago. A Green Tech Media article released this past June 12th cited that for the first time ever, baseload retirements outpaced baseload additions with 23 gigawatts of net retirements since 2010. Of the 84.2 gigawatts of retirements, 61% were coal and 29% were gas steam turbine plants. Nearly 7% of today's baseload capacity is over the age of 50, and more than 23% is over the age of 40. The shift to distributed renewable energy is increasingly imminent. Nevada recently reinstated net metering after, in late 2015, utility regulators eliminated the policy, effectively disincentivizing homeowners to go solar in that state. And traditionally, oil and gas firms want in on the renewable action as well. Statoil has made significant investments in offshore wind in Europe, note Project Highwind, and Total, majority shareholder of SunPower, has positioned itself to be a global leader in solar. However, our transition to renewables and clean technology faces one huge barrier, and that's infrastructure. Originally in the Socket and Pulse, Moore aims to cover this. Jessica, would you mind giving us a brief introduction of Moore and the concept behind it?
Hi, my name's Jess. You can call me Jess. Straightforward. So a little bit about Moore and what we're doing. So my company, Uncharted Play, is actually 6 years old. We started out making energy-generating sports products, like soccer balls and jump ropes that actually harness the kinetic energy that's generated during play, and then you can actually store that power inside the ball and use it as an off-grid power source. So super bottom of the pyramid, even though I hate that phrase, super kind of distributed, consumerized power. That same core technology over the last 6 years, though, we've now optimized and put into infrastructure solutions. And so, essentially what I saw over time, and people ask me how did I get into energy as well. I'm a dual citizen of Nigeria and the United States, so most of my family lives in Nigeria. Most of my family doesn't have power. So I got into energy because my cousins needed energy. It's really simple, nothing too fancy there. And so as I spent more time there and started first with the Socket and the Pulse products, started to realize that ultimately what we're looking at here is not a socioeconomic issue, whether you're in the richest part of the world, or particularly these emerging markets, or the global south, or whether in some of the more poorer regions, it's really an infrastructure issue. The grid can't scale, and the foundational infrastructures that you need to think about developing truly cutting-edge energy solutions, or at least doing them in the way that we've done it here in the United States and in Europe. It just wasn't something that was economically feasible. And so we thought, well, how do we create solutions that allow for the leapfrogging of energy in the same way that you saw with mobile technology? How do you create solutions that at the same time address the energy issues while also addressing the need for infrastructure? And that's by essentially combining the two. So in the last 2 years, we've developed solutions. We actually call them MORE solutions. So MORE is actually an acronym. It stands for Motion-Based Off-Grid Renewable Energy. And these are solutions that harness energy from vehicular and pedestrian traffic. Right now we have energy harnessing speed bumps, and we're scaling to energy harnessing floor panels, sidewalks, and roads. The concept being that if you make the floor essentially your foundational infrastructure and you build that up, you can then build up from that. So first powering data sensors, then powering security solutions, and powering electrification solutions, and then you're actually able to use that not only as a generation tool, but as a transmission tool, and then all of a sudden you start to build autonomous microgrids. On Uncharted Play right now, we design renewable energy technology systems for smart systems and for infrastructure. We are looking at what we walk on and what we run on and what we play on in a different way, and then ultimately looking at how everything moves around us as a source of power. Designing solutions that essentially turn this chair or a stroller into a source of power as well, and thinking about all of this, how all of this gets connected in an efficient way. So if you watch us for a while and ever get a chance to come and see the work we're doing on the continent, you'll see us actually building up new cities with our technology that we hope will be changing the way people not only generate power, but the way they consume it and think about it as well.
Thank you. So, great segue into our next question. Looking at countries with more developed electrical grids versus less developed electrical grids, and I find that a lot of times those more developed electrical grids have more economic means rather than the flip side. So, considering both areas, and they have really completely different needs as well. Which type of electrical grid is really more quickly addressable? The less developed or the more developed?
Okay. So that's an interesting question. Let me attempt to rephrase. So I don't think we can really compare like which grid. So there's like a grid that's more reliable than another, right? So the grid in the developed world is, it's almost like why it's developed, because it's reliable. The fact that you can reliably put on the lights here is like, okay, good, we're in the developed world. That's almost like how you know if you're in the developing or developed world. So as such, the question is like, do you keep going down a losing path, or do you create a new game? The same thing happened with landlines. It's a really great analogy. People would always have the dropping of phone lines, and communication was a real issue in many areas of the global south, and then cell phones came, and what really made cell phones take off was actually the growth in emerging markets. I remember 6 or 7 years ago being embarrassed because my cousins in Nigeria had a significantly better phone than I did, and they just threw so much shade that I had to get another phone. And so that's what gets kind of exciting when you think about the adoption of innovation then, right? So when you're thinking about renewable energy, you're thinking about how can it scale and ultimately compete with fossil fuels. You need a lot of different things, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but you do need people who feel that the current situation, the current status quo is not good enough. And so if we're thinking about which grid is better for the adoption of renewable energy, I actually think it is the grid that you'll find in developing or emerging market communities, because they are willing to rethink the way they currently get their power. They're not beholden to the lobbyists behind fossil fuels, because fossil fuels aren't cutting it right now. And actually a lot of these countries don't even do the processing of the oil and things like that too, so they actually aren't making as much money off of it as you might think. And so in that way, when I'm really excited about building new systems in these markets, and what I'm seeing there is that it's not really going to be one massive grid. The future is really going to be centralized, distributed energy.
There are clearly things that we can do and we should be doing to improve, but with the bars. So if we're a developing country, we're talking about giving people electricity rather than improving its margin, right? And I think that's a massive point. I totally agree about this idea about distributed energy, but microgrids, and I think that's where developing nations are heading next. You look at like a city similar to New York or Houston or Chicago, and these massive, reliable grids, and they're doing fantastically well for the most part. But for countries that don't have that at all, in my opinion, putting up spots, putting up microgrids and distributed electricity throughout a developing nation is really going to take them to the next level. One of the clients I work with, so her experience is really more in companies and what companies that she works with are doing. My experience is really in some of what my clients are doing. And so when I'm working with them, I'm either working with investors or the company itself. And I can see these risks and see the thoughts and the goals and the troubles that a company or an investor may have. And one of the companies that I like to work with quite a bit, and they are completely reshaping the way that we think about electricity generation and distribution. They're doing wireless. It's like the craziest thing in the world. And trying to get away from the grid at all. So imagine like a village in rural Kenya that isn't connected to a massive grid. You set up a microgrid, and somehow you can transmit electricity wirelessly. It's really shaping the way we think about geopolitics and energy, how we think about energy innovation in and of itself. So I think things like that, technologies like that, specifically in developing countries and developing economies, are really where we're heading and really what's going to change the world.
Sure. So kind of delving deeper into that point, a lot of critics argue that companies that provide fishes rather than teaching to fish, companies that are providing products, providing microgrids, providing tangible objects, are not really, that's first of all not a sustainable long-term business solution for the company themselves, but ultimately hurts communities rather than helping them stand up on their own 2 feet.
The idea of just kind of bringing in technology and saying that you've solved an energy solution or that you're giving someone a fish, I think is an oversimplification of what it really means to have a sustainable energy system. So for any solution to really make sense, and in and of itself for it to be something that's successful, regardless of how you want to come at it from like an impact perspective or whatnot, like you need to think about the technological solution, you need to think about the business model solution, and you need to think about the governmental or policy solution and how that all plays together. And so, to the extent that anyone's looking to do something sustainable, you kind of have to think about how that all plays in. The fourth thing that I think sometimes people forget when they're thinking about infrastructure or energy is that you have to think about the community that you're integrating into. So for example, what we do at Uncharted Play is make sure that whenever possible, we can do the final mile or just the final assembly of our solutions in that community. Just setting up manufacturing facilities where we're providing jobs, that we do STEM and STEAM education about renewable energy and about inventing so that they're either part of our tech talent pipeline or just simply feel like collaborators and actually are collaborators in the way that we're thinking about designing these microgrids, designing these solutions. And we engage, and for me, it's not CSR, it's good business. I mean, a lot of people still think that, I'm obviously speaking about the continent here, I'm speaking about Africa. There are a lot of people who still think that Africa is a country. And those people are really making it super easy for me to do really well because it's not. It's actually a very diverse place that is full of very intelligent people, and so you actually want them as collaborators. Like you want to empower them because that's how you're going to get the best product. That's how you're going to get the best solution. And so to me, it's bad business just to hand something over, and it should be the business owners who are like realizing that this is a horrible way to do things. But that said, on a broader note, what I found, because not only am I the CEO of Uncharted Play, I'm also working with a nonprofit called X Prize. I don't know if anyone, how many people know what X Prize is here? Okay, so I'm right now, I know you know, right now, X Prize is a nonprofit foundation that essentially designs prizes to incentivize exponential change in areas that they think are needed to really move the world forward. And so right now, I was actually named the Bold Innovator on their Abundant Clean Energy Prize, which basically is like designing the business model for the entire industry so that we can move forward and design a solution that's unilaterally better than fossil fuels, faster than what we're currently doing on the natural step. And so what I'm finding there is that there's like the clean energy people and then there's the energy poor people, and they have perceived themselves to be totally separate, right? And that's where you get this dichotomy of, well, let's just make something really cool here and hand it to them. Because the concept of innovation happening where people also just need the power, it seems so clear to me because I'm Nigerian and I'm like, duh, we're like super smart, but like, apparently it's like not clear to a lot of people. It's almost mind-boggling when they're just like, oh, well, you know, like, for this to really be a breakthrough, for us to prove cold fusion, like, it has to be done in Silicon Valley. And I'm like, why? Like, cold fusion when the lights turn on here. You have to go to the people who are in dire need of an energy solution, and they will mess with your random cold fusion solution, which I'm already kind of like this on. And so those are the conversations that I'm constantly having with these amazing scientists. I'm just like, dude, like the mad scientists in Arizona, you are so similar to the mad scientists in Botswana. You have no idea. Why aren't you guys talking? Like, what's wrong with you? You're lonely for no good reason. Like, that's on you. Like, get on Tinder and find each other. Like, that's been the conversation for like months now, actually. And so, yeah, to me, it's like, it's not even about giving fishes or teaching people to fish. Like, it's about collaboration and partnership. Like, we need to stop with this, like, all of the patronizing, even, you know, talk around it. We're going to address this. We need to realize that in this world, if you want something very cool and for very world-changing to really move, you have to pull the people on the extremes together. That's what happened with mobile technology. That's what's going to happen with energy. And any business that's not thinking about it that way, I don't see them really making a huge dent in the next 5 to 10 years.
I'm tempted to sit over there.
I
think I kind of know what you guys invited me on the panel. There's a legal element to this as well, right? Which is making sure there's a legal framework in place. So to back to your question specifically, the question was, you know, if we invent technologies, if we hand these technologies off, is it better than working with the local population to make something grow? Obviously, what you said is absolutely correct. But there's a couple things to add to that, which is there needs to be a legal framework in place. There needs to be a process in place to make investment attractive, to make sure that your innovation, your technology, your inventions are being protected. And the problem with the legal framework, there's a lot of problems with that. I say that it's a very broad thought, but right now, if something were to be implemented, let's just say the U.S., not even a developing country, let's just say the U.S., there's fear that in the next 4 or 5, 6 years, because the politics are changing, that your investment will change, right? The value of your investment will change. And specifically in developing nations, whether it's us working with them to help them create something that works for them, that makes sense to them, for their culture and the economy, the process needs to begin to make sure that there's a sphere of trust, there's a sphere of understanding. So when capital goes in, everyone understands that it's worth something, that it's actually going to go where it needs to go. And for the investors that are actually looking for a return, which most investors are, that they'll be able to get that return. There's not going to be issues. And so when they go and they do that, and you look at the numbers of how often investment and money goes into developing nations, and it just kind of disappears. There's a question, right? They get nervous. Their investors get nervous. Right? The diligence that is requested of this client is nothing I've ever seen, because people want to see the contracts, people want to talk to, people want to have background checks run on the parties they're dealing with. Right? And I think that's important, and it's bilateral. It's both parties. It's the investors. It's the countries. It's the politicians. So everyone coming together and saying, okay, we can do this. We can make this right. Not right now, but for the next 20, 30 years, your investment will be solid. Your invention, your technology, where you're putting it, it's going to be there. No one's going to steal it. It's going to be helpful. It's going to help people.
Yeah, it's just funny that you know, and it's true. We started doing a lot of work here in the U.S. and in Europe, but we've found that working in emerging markets has really helped us scale and grow and just have the opportunity to build and do very cool things very quickly away from all the regulations. But a couple things that you highlighted there, we find that it is, as much as we're selling our business, we're also selling and basically marketing the market that we're going into. So we've created long videos introducing Africa to individuals here. When we talk to people here and say this is where we're going to work, they'll say things like, well, aren't you afraid of tribalism? I'm like, what are you talking about? We go to the mall just like everyone else. And so I think there is a informational kind of learning thing that has to happen 360. But even the concept of them saying like, oh man, it's a gift from God to bring this over is one of those things where I'm just kind of like, it presents like man's guilt to a little bit, because it's like, or it's, wow, like I can't wait to bring this here, get feedback, and develop something that's going to change the energy conversation. And I think that's what people are saying when they talk about this fish thing. It's, we have to make sure that if this is a global problem, that we're truly including everyone from a global perspective to solve this. And I think if we do that, there will be no more concern about who's bringing what where and who's kind of dropping things. Like it's collaboration, and it's just opening up, I think, the lines of communication in a way that allow for a better implemented product down the line.
Right, and I think a couple follow-up things. I think one, perhaps it's more perception about developing nations.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then that needs to change as well. And I think transparency is a big step in the right direction. Most investors, I say this all the time, most investors, they want a return. They want to make money. There are investors out there that are totally cool. Very, very few investors. Usually they are billionaires. It's losing a billion here or there is not a big deal. But most investors want a return. And so if that's the case, how do we actually make positive change? It's changing the perception, right? It's changing the perception, making sure that people understand that Africa is not a country. And really changing the conversation, exactly what you said, which is, it needs to be a global goal. And I think, we have politicians here and there that don't see it that way. So it's kind of like changing and shifting all of that.
I wanted to kind of pick on, first of all, thank you for that experience. That was great and very informative. And I had a question that kind of arose from there that, from a perspective that I didn't really think of before. So, Jessica, you talked very much about collaboration and innovation and the role that collaboration plays in innovation and solving energy as a global problem, which I agree with you, I think it is. Eliot, you kind of talked about the importance of establishing a legal framework to go along with this and how important that is. So one main thing I think that comes along with innovation is kind of intellectual property, right? You come up with an idea and it's my idea and I'm going to get paid for it and I'm going to get royalties and so on and so forth, because at the end of the day, very few people, I feel like, have that Mother Teresa complex where they just want to do stuff that's good for the world. They want to make money. So you have this intellectual property problem. So in the context of that, knowing that there isn't really one large legal framework that's governing the world and saying this is what intellectual property or patent law is, it kind of varies country to country. How do you kind of reconcile that when you're collaborating and innovating on such a global scale?
So I can only speak to what we do, and I'm sure you have more experience from a broader perspective. Yes, we talk to our lawyers about this. They're like, this is going to be tricky. We have found that, it really depends on what the strategy within the country is, whether it's about growth or whether it's about the IP. In some scenarios, you're really thinking about obviously the enforceability of your IP regardless of where it's created. So if you want to build a global company, it means you want to sell your product to global customers. Whether you make it all in the US or not, once it leaves the borders, you are now at risk. So ultimately, IP is a very interesting game. It's funny, everyone who I who I know who kind of almost thought about IP law, but they thought it was way too hard. I think IP law is just amazing and exciting, and they think I'm on drugs when I say that. But it's interesting because ultimately, when we look at the landscape, the risk isn't in developing the product overseas or getting an idea that feeds into the product that's developed overseas. It's really always business strategy as soon as you leave the borders of the United States, because regardless of where the product has been developed, regardless of the product where it has been patented, and where you've kind of secured your rights over it, once you start to scale, once you start to grow, you need to think about what are you doing from a branding perspective to push away competitors, to push away copycats. What are you doing from a strategic relationship perspective with the government, with other players, with your current customers? How are you designing your business model to protect you? That is the way that you function, regardless. Otherwise, unless you just happen to have money for days, anyone can come in and just, even if you have the rights, bleed you dry, and then when you're withered, still holding on to your principle and your rights of what you own, they can still come in and kind of take advantage of you. And so that's been our strategy. We kind of have a three-pronged strategy. We really push IP growth and having a very strong IP portfolio, yet patented in all the areas that make sense, that's enforceable, but really having a strong portfolio here in the United States. And then at the same time, we push a global brand, doing a lot of work to get into the faces of real customers, of real individuals, so that they really say, wow, like this is a narrative that we believe in. This is who we believe kind of came up with this regardless. And then on the third side, we spend a lot of time building strategic relationships. Our business development teams in all the countries we work in are incredibly strong. So strong that we find that if we have more people coming to say that they'd like to be acquired by us, then they would prefer to compete with us. And that's what's critical, kind of having that balance in that way. And so given that, when we think about collaborating with people overseas, we see only upside because we're diversifying the input into our product development, we're diversifying the perspective that we're hoping to have when we're thinking about our customers, and we're still able to patent this product and move forward with our resources that we have very much focused here in the US while catering to this market overseas.
I think this is much more of a business conversation, and I think she's exactly right. It's much more about your business plan and how you plan to scale, when you plan to scale, that should be the main focus. Outside of the energy realm, actually just dealt with a recent very similar issue in eyeglass work. A client of mine was selling eyeglasses in India, and they were worried about patent infringement. And instead of worrying about it too much, obviously they focused on their business plan and how they got that out there. But they built several models. I thought it was a very cool idea. They built several models under different names at different price points, and they went about it that way. And so, sure, you can infringe, you can make a cheaper product, but their thought was, we're going to make a high-end product, we're going to make a middle-end product, we're going to make a lower-end product, and market it differently, of course. And that was their business plan for that issue. Just saying.
Interesting. Never thought of that. Kind of shifting gears a little bit, I'd like to consider countries that are more reliable in their electrical grid capability. Just speaking from experience being in solar, pushback from utility companies is really disheartening, and really the private sector, I feel, can only do so much. I mean, public sector cooperation is almost a necessity to have any sort of shift in our collective view of energy be permanent. So, Jessica, you brought up cell phones earlier, and others have compared the energy industry now to the cell phone industry right before cell phones became mainstream, as if it's just on a cusp, like it's on its tipping point. Would you agree with that sort of comparison? Do you think it's fair?
I think that the industry itself, I think that they're different. Like, I think that from a innovation perspective, following the path of what happened with mobile technology, the leapfrogging there, I think that makes sense. But I don't necessarily think that's inevitable. with the energy industry, because I think that the infrastructure, the kind of incumbent infrastructure around energy is threefold that of what was even there in terms of cell phone technology. I mean, like, a lot of things had, you know, the mobile towers had to be built, people had to really think about the scaling of this, and it took time. Especially when you think about developed nations and their energy solutions, there's a lot there. There's a lot that's been there, and it's functioning, you know, well enough. You have to think about the way that cell phone technology really took hold here in the US and in Europe was from more of an on-demand convenience perspective, right? And so when you then frame that from an energy perspective, we're not necessarily addressing an on-demand, personalized convenience thing when we're thinking about solar or hydro or wind. We're just thinking about something that's renewable, which unfortunately is so intangible that it's like, it makes you feel good. It's kind of like, you know, like buying organic, I guess, or buying farm raised, but it's not like you're chilling on the farm with the, you know, with the chickens, you know, like it's not the, like, when, you know, when you go to Popeyes, you're not like, is this organic? You're just eating your Popeyes and you enjoy it, and then you also eat your organic. It's just what it is. So what we have then is this problem where it's not personally relevant to the individuals, and these organizations are built with individuals who are saying, yes, this makes sense, this is what the UN goals are, this is what sustainability is, etc. But for there to be a tipping point, there needs to be a personal connection, I think, that's missing right now with energy.
The connectivity between that field and the power plants, the power stations that they want to connect to, there's issues, right? Not every power station is equipped to take in anything but traditional fuels. So things like that, the capital that's going to be required, I think, is just massive. On a personal level, I think something that could potentially help two things with it. One is getting costs down, getting money out of people's pocket. That's a very personal element, and unfortunately, we're not there yet. I think we'll get there as cost of technology decreases, which it's doing every year drastically. And I think net metering, and I think we talked about it a lot, I think we opened up. I think it's a perfect example. Whatever a homeowner can, and homeowners incentivize really to generate electricity from their property, and essentially put it back to the grid. I think that will make a very personal impact to people. So I think everything she said was perfect. That is absolutely 100% right. It's got to be a personal element for people to actually care. I feel like as a society we're moving in the right direction. I feel like as a society we care, but like, you're right. Do folks really care how it's made as long as it's there? And do folks really care about the environment if they feel okay? Do they really care about greenhouse gas emissions if it doesn't really impact your life? You hear things, but do they really care about it? I don't know.
I think the reality situation is that there are a lot of good people who like theoretically care.
Yeah.
But I'm going to assume everyone in this audience is like a really good person, but we're not all sitting here in burlap sacks, like just like licking like some piece of bark or like, you know, like whatever it is. Like I've been doing sustainability for 11 years, but like, you know, I still gotta keep it together. So, like that's, I mean, like, so ultimately, like, I'm like, to me, good product design is when you design products that make it so easy to do good that it's just natural. Like, I always tell people who are trying to make things that are recyclable or getting people to recycle, I'm like, make it so that make it a model so that it makes sense to recycle. No one's here, I don't know anyone who's like, I hate like recycling, like I'm super against recycling. But it's like super hard sometimes to recycle. Like I'm reading a little design, a little this, a circle, it's confusing, I don't know where box, like I'm stressed out with the garbage. You don't need that during the day, you know? So I think that's where you go to the design side. And again, that's the problem when you're not collaborating and you have people who are so passionate about something, designing it, assuming everyone cares. It's like they don't, you know. And that's why I love how I got into energy, because again, I got into it because my family needed something, not because I was just like dreaming of energy. I was dreaming of the utility. I was dreaming of the pragmatism behind it. But speaking of trends, and like so. Yes, there's mobile technology and people saying, oh, is it matching that curve? I think that's happening less I see what's possible from innovation, but what I do think we need to be paying attention to from an energy perspective is what's happening in the financial system. And what I mean is, think about all the people who feel really uncomfortable with the incumbents from a banking perspective, and like everything just going to one place, and how they're trying to gain independence and empowerment from cryptocurrencies and all of that. That to me, and even if you look at the schooling systems, how people are thinking about charter schools, how people are starting to kind of spread out and say, actually, I'm really good with just this one thing that seems to be the almighty. I want to do my own thing. If that to me forebodes what's going to happen with the grid. And that's why I think when people are saying they're designing technologies that are going to flow into the grid, I'm just like, okay, so that means you're designing things for now and not tomorrow. That's cool. I mean, people have to get things done now, but I would almost pay more attention to the future of our current system and why it's not going to work so that you can kind of be ahead of it than kind of just the assumption that things will work out. Like, I think there's a few other trends we can match up against.
I just recently, just to jump on that, I recently read about a couple companies that are doing incredibly interesting. One was taking windows and making windows solar panels. Perhaps some of you guys know more than that about that than I do. But I think that's the idea, right? How do we make it easy? How do we make it so seamless to someone's life that it just makes sense all around?
Not even just that, I think it's the systems, right? So like, when you're talking about energy, you can't just talk about the generation. You have to talk about the transmission and the storage and then the sustainability of the business model. So there's the window company, there's a lab right now that just came up with solar paint that you can use for your house. I thought that was super dope. I was like, I want to require. Just wake up, require. But at the same time, what we're really thinking about is, going back to what I was saying with cryptocurrencies, well, why are we thinking that, net metering, you can make money by selling back to the grid? What if you just sold it to your neighbor?
Right.
Like what, and I think that that's what's going to happen, that people are going to have this urge for control and understanding, and things are going to go from big to small. And so designing systems in that way inherently lends itself to sustainability, because you're not just going for big, huge. You're going for what's needed in the moment and what's kind of being demanded, by the people, and then thus kind of like fed into by the same people.
Right. Totally agree again. I think back to maybe some words, the way I think that looking at everything you just said, and oftentimes we talk about solutions on a global or national level, and that's probably not the answer, right? That's probably not the answer. If you look at, if we try to make a national policy on wind generation, and we're looking at Plains, Nebraska versus New York City, different needs, different solutions. And so I think it really is much more kind of neighborhood by neighborhood, town by town, level that isn't actually making change. And I love the idea of if you create something, of being able to sell it next to it. I think it's exactly that.
Right, it's super Burning Man, right? It's a super Burning Man thing. But like, why not? Why not?
I told him to say that.
Well, first of all, I would just like to say you are officially my idol for mentioning Popeyes.
Oh.
I love Popeyes. But so just kind of going off of the innovation, there's a lot of ways that people kind of quantify, benefits of a good. They look at ROI, and that's very return on investment for those non-financial in the audience. And it's very, very money driven. It's very cash driven, and a lot of that doesn't, in my opinion, really fully capture the societal implications, the benefit to society, the cost to society, things like that. Do you think that kind of single-minded focus on, money, green, rather than kind of looking and incorporating, societal benefits into the green, do you think that affects innovation, and is it likely to, change anytime soon?
So I was actually at a meeting a couple weeks ago on altruism, and it was specifically about altruistic investing and whether or not that makes sense. What's the models about making an altruistic investment? I don't believe in true altruism at all. To be totally honest, I think everything we do I don't think we do anything that truly doesn't have a net positive impact on us. But we're sitting there talking about how do we quantify, and we're looking at examples of whether it's the Gates Foundation or the Clinton Foundation, how do we quantify the impact they're making? How do they quantify it, right? How do you look at it and say this was a positive return on my investment? And there's tons of metrics for how you do that. But I think the biggest thing is live, which is exactly what we talked about when we were right at the beginning of this, is human, right? How do we, the lives we are impacting and the lives we're changing. And depending on technology, that can be different. If we're talking about healthcare, or maybe actually talking about someone's life. We're talking about electricity, perhaps we're talking about someone's life, or perhaps we're talking about education and reading level that someone had because now they have access to internet, or access to the lights where they can read at night and read books. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part is, which and that's probably the answer to your question, but I think something else that's really important is what companies are doing in terms of marketing, how they're making these investments, but they're really doing it for marketing purposes. And they're doing it because they're nice people, they would say, but really it's because it looks good, right? I think that's what's coming down to it. What's the impact on the bottom line? I hate to say that, but I really believe that's the case.
I think I'm one of those weird people who kind of believes that everything can be modeled. Ultimately, money is just a piece of paper that we use to represent, value. And so a lot of things have value, but sometimes there just isn't a very clear market to access it. And so speaking, when you talk about like societal gains, if there was a clear, I believe that if all things being equal and everyone had access to money, there would be people who would say, making sure that, my kids don't grow up in a dark Gotham-esque world where they can't even breathe outside because of all the, the burning of carbon, and fossil fuels, they would pay something for that. They would pay something for that. There's a value to it. There are people who would say, there's a value that can be equated to a cash number to make sure that energy is equitable, energy is accessible, that it is green, that it's clean. Like there's a value. People might say, oh gosh, it's going to be so much more expensive to make X product when all of these people have lung cancer because blah blah blah. So there's a value. There's always something. And so to me, it's important for people who think about social good as part of their model, which we do. We ultimately internally call ourselves an impact company because we want impact to be driven in everything we do, from what we're making, but also the way we build our company from a diversity perspective as well. But we don't do it just because it's good. We actually believe that we can model the success of our business based on the diversity of our team because we can see the value in having a team that looks like the people we serve. We see the value in having varied perspectives. We see the financial value in doing good because good is usually something that people want. I am who I am today because from the age of 20 to 28, Michelle Obama was my first lady, and her husband was pretty cool too.
I heard they like Popeyes.
I'm sure they did. It's delicious. That's just a fact, yeah. But I feel that what's beautiful about the United States is that we have individuals who are willing and also able, legally able, for now, to speak up when they don't agree with the politics of our country and to use their voices and to use their pockets to move things forward. I think that Bloomberg especially has been doing that in a very awesome and very inspiring way. Obviously there's also the Breakthrough Energy Group, the coalition that Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and several others joined together. And so, I'm a firm believer that if you really want something to happen efficiently, there needs to be a business model behind it. I think government is not designed to be efficient; it's designed to be very inclusive, right? And so I think that's why you also need government in play, but it's not the end-all, be-all. And so it all ends up kind of being a balance, and you have to hope that there's going to be a perfect balance. But I think in terms of things happening within the United States now, yes, I think unfortunately given the current agenda that seems to be set forth, It's going to be driven by private individuals and private companies that want to keep going down a certain track that we've been going down previously. And I think it's an even better reason to think about emerging markets, an even better reason to think about global collaboration. It's an even better reason to realize that that great innovation may not come from where we've seen it before. It's a numbers, right? Like most likely the next Einstein is going to be a woman, and it's probably going to come from India or Nigeria. It's just a numbers game. It's not, I'm not saying anything. Obviously, I'm Nigerian, I have certain biases, but that's where it is. And so we are actively looking and working in these areas, and I'm excited to find the people who are going to crack this nut from an economic perspective so that the US, in the same way with cell phone technology, just feels the need to have to move forward.
So I think this is, the first part is probably more of a personal thing, but I think everyone gets upset, and we get, when I was there on election night, people people forget that it's just 4 years or it's just 8 years, but companies last for much longer than that, right? Companies, their interests last much longer than that. And one of the things that I negotiate very hard for sometimes in deals whenever I make an investment is whether or not, like let's say a VC fund, for instance, makes an investment in a renewable energy company, is whether or not they can put that company's logo on the website. It seems like a small thing, but we talk about it all the time. People want the publicity. People want to make sure that the community, that their investors know what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I think the social push is absolutely going to keep going in the right direction, regardless of what this administration wants to do. And from the social push, corporate actions will follow. I think that to me is, and that's not 4 years, that's not 8 years, that's just going to keep happening. And if every scientist thinks something is real, such as climate change, and society believes that, they'll push industry to do the same thing. And the clients I work for, a lot of clients are traditional oil and gas companies, and they appreciate that. And they're making changes to be either more efficient, or they're making investments in renewables. It's the same thing. So we, as a populace, will push the industry in the right direction. And with that, I think the change that we want, the change we need will come with it.
So, round of applause for our two panelists. Thank you guys so much. And on behalf of Uncharted Play, Vinson Elkins, and the New York City chapter of Young Professionals in Energy, thank you all for joining us this Wednesday evening.